What forces the Russians have gathered to defend Crimea, and the unenviable fate of the Bakhmut defenders. We talk a lot about the Zaporizhia region, sometimes about the left bank Kherson region, assess the possibilities of offensive and defensive enemy groups in these directions, make forecasts. But little attention is paid to the temporarily occupied Crimea. But what Russian forces are currently providing for the defense of Crimea? The Crimea grouping of troops, or the Crimean Defense Grouping of Troops, is responsible for this task. And as of today, it is just over 11,000 personnel. Yes, I didn't misspell it, 11,000. But what is most interesting is how much equipment this weakest of all groups of troops has in service. And now attention. Tanks, about 30. Armored fighting vehicles, less than 60. Artillery, about 90 barrels. MLRS, 4 units. If we use the Index Battalion Tactical Group in relation to them, the picture looks even more gloomy. After all, these 14 BTGs in Crimea have only 30 tanks instead of 154, 60 armored fighting vehicles instead of 462, 90 artillery barrels instead of 168. That's a monstrous understaffing. Of course, Crimea is a defensive springboard, which will be saturated with the forces and means of those who will escape from the mainland south of Ukraine. That is, these 11,000 in the process of fleeing Russian troops from the mainland south will dramatically increase by 100,000 or more, but there is a nuance. Usually where it's thin it cracks loudest. But in the case of Crimea, everything will crack. But back to Bakhmut. While Kleshivka, Andriivka and Kurdymivka were parts of the occupant support line in the southwestern sector of Bakhmut, the railroad was a conventional defense line, the crossing of which would create a lot of problems for the Russians. After all, on its left side is a direct route to the southern logistical artery 0513. After a series of unsuccessful counterattacks on Kleshivka and Andriivka, the enemy's resources have been drained, and for the most part they are now sitting on the left side of the railroad in the forest belts waiting for the inevitable mop-up. But to cross the railroad is not such an easy task. There are several convenient crossings, especially in the vicinity of Andriivka, due to the presence of crossings and optimal routes towards Odradivka. But for now they are shot through by the enemy, especially from the nearby forest belts. The solution is a matter of time and the amount of cluster munitions, then the inevitable will happen, mopping up the survivors. But the main thing is that one way or another, but this crossing will take place and the advance to Highway 0513, which is already under fire control of the AFU, will begin. But when physical control over it is established, we can talk about success in the southwestern sector and the beginning of advancement in the southeastern sector. The AFU will put a stop to the Russian defense capabilities as a whole south of Bakhmut and the possibility of taking under fire control eastern logistics. To reinforce the southern direction, the Russians have only one option: transferring resources from the north. However, if they start moving units from the north, the potential in this direction will be reduced, with negative consequences. But how can the Russian command operate the resource, after the AFU will establish fire control over all logistics in this area? Rhetorical question.